This machine will have eyes, ears, and a voice.
This is PVP Television News.
I want to thank National Grid very much for being willing to come along to this meeting. I don't think it's a mandatory part of the consultation process, but what happened is that the local communities in Cefn and in Abermule asked me if I'd organise a meeting and invite them to come along as an information meeting. And I do want to emphasise that the intention of tonight's meeting is not to be a protest meeting at all. If it is a protest meeting, I'd be sitting down there. But it's a straightforward information meeting, and so I've agreed to chair it, because I know there are many people who simply want to ask questions of National Grid about details of their proposals, and that's the purpose of tonight's meeting. I always generally take the view where people have real criticisms of the government policy, it's the politicians that should take the brunt of that. It isn't even the Windfarm companies, it's the politicians that should be the target of criticism.
So my name's David Mercer, and I'm responsible for National Grid's major projects nationally. And with me today are Jeremy Lee. Jeremy's the project manager for the Mid Wales project, and we've got some specialists from Jeremy's team on the front row here who will help answer your questions. Now, all of us from National Grid know and understand how concerned you are about the proposals in Mid Wales. We're here tonight to try and answer all of your questions, and we'll genuinely try to do that. I'm now going to spend just a minute or two explaining the national energy and planning background. Then I'll hand on to Jeremy. Jeremy will update you on where we are with the project and how our intentions are for moving forward, and then we'll take your questions. So without further ado, in the UK, it's important I say this, we're at an absolute crossroads as we try to meet the European and the government's carbon targets for energy for all of us. Around a quarter of our existing power stations in the UK are due to close over the next 5 to 10 years. And those power stations are closing because they're either too old or because they can't meet the new carbon emissions targets. Now, to bridge that gap as a nation, we're faced with having to connect a range of low-carbon generators around England and Wales. These include new nuclear stations, as well as new wind farms, and new gas power stations with carbon capture in the future. Most of those new developments are in remote locations. They tend to be around the coast or a long way from our grid connections. So as is the case here in Mid Wales, we're faced with having to build new connections to bring that electricity to consumers. Now, turning to planning issues, we know new electricity connections, wherever they're located, have to be planned sensitively, and that's why it's absolutely right that planning permission is required. So for any major electricity connection project in the UK, planning permission is required, and of course that's the case here in Wales. For all of these new connections, we're absolutely committed to working with local stakeholders, and that's because we have to try and strike a balance between the costs of what we build, which pass on to all of us as consumers, against the local impacts and the local environmental impacts, and there has to be a balance that's struck there. But what's absolutely critical about this, ultimately the decision isn't with National Grid as to where that balance lies. It's with the planning authorities, so that's your local authorities and with government. And ultimately, whatever we take forward, those planning decisions will have to be made by elected representatives. Now, that's all I wanted to say by way of introduction. Jeremy's just going to now update you on where we are with the project.
I just want to say, first of all, just recap the overall structure of the proposals in Mid Wales. There are various developers looking to site wind farms around Powys and Carnedd. Our colleagues in Scottish Power are proposing to build a network of 132 kilovolt lines to collect the power from those wind farms and deliver it to what's been called a hub substation. And then National Grid needs to make a connection route through Powys into Shropshire to link up with the existing UK-wide electricity transmission system. Of that, I'm sure you're all familiar now. Looking back, we announced our proposals in spring last year and held a widespread consultation exercise, over 50 events, more than half of which we held with Scottish Power. We had over 6,000 people come through the doors of those events, and they provoked over 6,500 individual items of feedback. We were very pleased that we got that strong a response to that consultation exercise, and we recognise the extensive community and the media interest in that. What did you tell us? Well, in the analysis of the feedback that we got, some themes shone out loud and clear, and they very clearly agreed with the messages that we had directly at the events. So, we heard very clearly that the scale of the proposals is seen by many to be unsuitable. We heard that overhead transmission is not your preferred option for our connection. We know that you're concerned about the visual impact. We know very well that you're concerned on the possible effects on tourism, on transport in the local area, and on public health perhaps. These concerns have fed into additional work that we've commissioned that will help us weigh those themes up, those potential impacts up, and help us make a choice between the options that we came forward with last year. We're continuing to talk to our key stakeholders, UK and Welsh national governments, local councils in Powys and Shropshire, and environmental and technical groups, the Countryside Council for Wales, CADU, Environment Agency, and similar sorts of organisations. So where is that leading us? Clearly, we need to make a choice between the two substation siting areas that we consulted on last year, and between the routing options that connect between them and the existing system. We can't do that alone. It's important that we not only look at National Grid's part of this project, but also at that collector network that our colleagues in Scottish Power need to develop. We need to balance all the themes, all the issues that have been raised. We need to use all the work and all the facts that have been brought to our attention. Not all of this work is done. Much of it's completed, but there are still some bits that need to be finished. When we have made that decision public, we'll answer the questions that were raised in the consultation in a quite weighty document that will be published. We'll also explain the information that we've used to come to that decision in a separate document. Those will be freely available and for you to look at your leisure. Our target is to make that choice public towards the end of March.
Thank you, Jeremy, and the team for coming to see us here in Newtown. We appreciate any information that you can give us tonight that will help to relieve the huge anxiety that started in March when you announced your intentions and has continued and been exacerbated really by the delay in announcing your preferred route. So anything you can tell us tonight that will help to ease the huge anxiety would be great. A couple of questions really. One relates to a meeting that you held at Westfeld. I don't know if you can cast your mind back to that, Jeremy. And I spoke to you and Gary Swain some time ago. During our conversation you said that were the hub to be rejected and where was public opposition to continue to grow, as it certainly is, you would seriously have to look at this whole project and the viability of the whole project. I'm wondering if you'd like to sort of expand on that that statement.
If I could just start with an introductory response to some of the comments you made there. We're very much aware on all these projects, and we do have a number around England and Wales with major new connections, that when we are looking at a whole series of routes, it has an effect on a very wide section of the community, and we're very sensitive to that. And you know, I can understand your frustration that it's taking us some time to narrow down, because people worry about that, and we understand that. But it's absolutely a process of the new Planning Act in England and Wales that we're required to demonstrate that we've looked at all the options, that we've consulted on them, that we take into account local views before we make key decisions. So we do understand your concerns on that point, but if you can bear with us till towards the end of March, we'll have some announcements to make there. Now, in terms of what happens if we're refused, the position is that we have a number of Windfarm connections that have contracted with us as a business to connect them to the grid, and we're obliged in law to make them a connection offer and develop that. Now, if we're refused consent for any part of this connection that's necessary, then we'll have to look very carefully at why it was refused, because the Secretary of State will make the decision on any overhead line, and the local authority for any hub substation will set out clearly what their reasons for refusal are. We'd have to look at those as a team and see how those could be addressed. If the project needed varying, if there was a different route advocated or whatever. And until you see those reasons, it's difficult for us to add to that. So, you know, I hope that gives you an answer.
One of the major concerns is health. I'm aware that the wires and the hub would have an electromagnetic field around them. What is currently the minimum safe distance that you would consider for a person to be living within the location of the wires and the hub?
We've got a specialist member of the team here this evening who knows far more about that subject than I do, or David, I suspect. So I'll hand over, if I can, I'll introduce John Swanson, who, again, many of you may have seen at some of the public exhibitions. He'll be able to give you a much more thorough answer than I could.
Thank you and good evening. You're absolutely right to talk about what are the safe levels that are set for EMFs, because as many of you will have heard us talk about, we believe quite strongly it would be wrong for us as the company proposing the lines to be the people who decided what was safe or not. So we've put that decision firmly out of our hands. It's in government's hands, advised by the Independent Health Protection Agency.
After nearly 12 months of consultation, etc., and information fed to us, I'm still at a loss to understand why one of the fastest growing villages in Wales, nearly 1,000 inhabitants, should have been chosen as one of the victims of the hub. The hub is going to be within 100 metres of the school, of the perimeter of the village, 150 metres from the school. Parents are already considering taking their children away from the school if the hub is built there. That will lead to the closure of the school. There are major businesses in the village which have also stated that they will pull out. There's a great concern over the health. We already have a hotspot, supposed cancer possible hotspot in the village. Now, that may or may not be proven to be a cause of the high power lines, but there are 7 power lines, 7 high voltage power lines coming in or around the village because of its location. It has to be radially connected. Why was it ever chosen? Why did you choose a highly inhabited area?
These things can't be situated just anywhere, and there are constraints on their placement. you need a site that's fairly large. It's critical national infrastructure. It shouldn't flood. It needs to be reasonably level. It needs to be accessible. And there needs to be a credible way of gaining access to it for the connections that are required.
It's clear that a lot of us don't agree, and I'm one that doesn't agree with everything that Jeremy is saying to us. And but what I think we've got to do is, I mean, I'm the chairman, I feel pretty strongly about this, but I'm going to contain myself to make no negative noises at all while we have answers to our questions, and I just appeal to everybody else to try and do the same thing.
First Minister of Wales, Cllr Jones, recently said in a meeting that the connection, the network connection in Mid Wales has to be strengthened, not only to take power out, but to bring power in to Mid Wales. And he implied that if that doesn't happen, that will have a detrimental effect on business and the lights will go out in Montgomeryshire first. Do you agree with that?
That's more properly a question for Scottish Power. National Grid are only part of this project, as you well appreciate.
The First Minister of Wales made it very clear that he wasn't in favour of a substation at all. He felt that TAN8 targets could be achieved without it. A lot of us suspect he's now looking for a way to change his position. And he's coming up with this line about needing power to come in to save us. Anyway, we shall have to wait and see.
Does anyone know the true cost of undergrounding, including National Grid? We were told at the exhibitions back in last April, May, that Cllr were doing a costings exercise, and that seemed to fall by the wayside.
The entire cost for this project overhead is 178 million, that's National Grid's element, and underground it's 562 million. Now, the important thing is here that there is still an independent assessment that has been done, and you referred to Cllr study there, and that's what I referred to earlier. It's been published by the Institution of Engineering and Technology. It was actually finished by PB Power. It's been published on Tuesday, so you'll be able to see what their assessment of the facts are.
The question I would like to ask is that, as you well know, that on the big DEC applications, Powys County Council will be moving to make a recommendation to DEC very soon, certainly within the next few months, and starting very soon. If the Cabinet of Powys County Council were to actually recommend refusal, and I'm not prejudging that issue, but if they were, then that would almost certainly mean that a conjoined inquiry would take place, which by the estimation of legal experts would be several years to complete. How would that affect your plans? And if the outcome of that conjoined inquiry was all those cases were lost, would this mean the end of this project and the remaining power would be taken out on 132s?
This answer really, the position is that if the wind farms don't receive consent, essentially they'll have to terminate their contracts with us, and if the contracted generation background drops, then we'll have to look at our need case with SPEN as to whether this project's necessary. Absolutely.
Thank you. The power's in your hands.
National Grid have now moved the date of announcing their hub station location to sometime in May. Councillor Michael Jones, who is the chair of the Cabinet, is now addressing issues in relation to the use of a webcam.
First of all, I would invite the Chief Executive perhaps to say a few words as introduction.
Thank you, Leader. There are two applications before the Cabinet, and they're going to be considered in turn. I think the first one will be Llanbadarn Fynydd, the second one will be Carnedd Wen. As you said, Leader, there's extensive presentation this morning. The Cabinet will not be going through that presentation again. However, before the debate, I understand there could be a number of questions which Cabinet members may wish to ask planning officers in respect of detail, either arising from this morning or other issues. And just before Cabinet members start, Leader, it may be an opportune time just to listen to the planning officers to say if they have any additional comments to make before Cabinet start.
Obviously, two very detailed planning reports that are appended to the Cabinet report. The overarching Cabinet report deals with things as in terms of matters of principle and a summary of the issues, but it does include within it the recommended reasons for objecting to these two applications. Clearly, there'd been the motion that was agreed in the earlier meeting that was for additional reasons to be added to those recommended reasons. There's nothing more I really want to say, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
We now listen to just some of the main concerns from various Cabinet members while they debate these two wind farm applications.
That the Powys economy is sinking faster than any other economy in the United Kingdom. And I'm not saying Wales or England, I'm saying United Kingdom. We have evidence of that, clear evidence. And here we are trying and working really hard to try and do something about that. And we have this great elephant in the room that really is threatening to actually make a lot of that work, if not all of it, completely irrelevant.
Give a positive view on this would be if we'd had all our questions answered to our complete satisfaction. And in the absence of that, I think we're bound to object to it.
And I actually think the public concern around the hubs and the pylons and the cabling is a sufficiently strong case to actually include that in as well as a reason for saying, well, we'd like to make this decision, but actually having this uncertainty makes it incredibly difficult to do anything other than the recommendation we've got before us.
I want to make sure that our objections do indeed trigger a public inquiry, because I believe that until we do, it will be very, very difficult to convince the Minister of just how detrimental these proposals could be for the county of Powys.
It's the traffic. It really is the traffic. And thank you to Dale for explaining the loads and how it actually works out in reality rather than theory that we've been sent from the companies over the last couple of weeks in relation to traffic. Until this matter is addressed, I will have to go with the officer's recommendation on this matter.
Thank the officers for all the work they've put into this, and that I'll be going with the three recommendations. Thank you.
We, as a county council, send representatives to the policing authority. We, as part of our council tax arrangement, collect some of their funding for them. I just wonder, are the applicants paying the entire policing bill here? And if they are, they will be taking up the time of a considerable number of police officers. Who fills the void?
If you're in favour of that we seek external advice as a principle, please show. Okay, well that is passed, and thank you very much. That's unanimous. Now, before you all
Powys County Council have now rejected both wind farm applications. This will now lead to a public inquiry, which can be quite a lengthy process. National Grid have informed PVPTV News that they do not have any involvement in the construction of wind farms.
Been with us the full time that we've been out on site and today's meeting.
This machine will have eyes, ears, and a voice.